Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is MacLeod True Nerd, and welcome to the 300,000 subscriber special. It is Excel. Now, this might be a surprise to those of you who haven't seen this being hinted at on Twitter or whatever, because Excel is not exactly a game that I'm known for, or indeed a game full stop. But regardless, it's one of my favourite games of all time. I love Excel. I genuinely love Excel. Okay, fine, it's probably not one of my favourite games of all time because it's not a game. If it were a game, it'd be one of my favourite games of all time. It is one of my favourite bits of software of all time. That's legitimate. That's perfectly fine. Because before I was a YouTuber, I did a lot of work related to data analysis, and Excel is just... it's just beautiful and wonderful, and I kind of just wanted to visit it again because I do flipping love Excel, and conveniently, because I actually needed a data set, 2,500 members of the community actually came together to create a data set out of nothing for me, which was marvellous. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some data, and we're going to take the data and we're going to turn it into better data, and we're going to get insights out of it and visualize it and automate it, and hopefully if you're you've ever used Excel or you think you might need to use Excel for work or whatever, then actually hopefully this might be a little bit on the useful side, because this in front of you right here, this is data. Basically I just asked the community on Twitter and Reddit and the Discord and whatever to basically fill out a little kind of a Google Forms, an online survey with just some basic little information. So a timestamp gets associated with them, and I just asked them when did they subscribe to MATN, though plenty of people couldn't remember, they're just kind of estimating, what country they're from, what was the game they first watched a video of on MATN, what's their favourite video game full stop, and do they watch the MATN live streams. I kind of wanted people to do that because if I just kind of generated data by myself, then it would probably be a totally random distribution, which wouldn't be that interesting. This way, at least there's some logic underneath the data, so there'll actually be patterns to try and figure out. And this is just basically a full pool of that data, with each line representing one person. This is very often how data is presented. One line for a person, and then against each column, a thing related to them, a user ID, an email address sometimes if you've got identifying information, for example. And then there's just an awful lot of rows. Quite a lot of rows. It just kind of keeps going down as more and more people filled out the thing. But the problem with data like this, as you've probably figured out already, is it's not exactly readable. And that is what good Excel is all about. It's about taking data like this and making it useful and readable and ultimately insightful. And that's what's very, very useful indeed. So that's what we're going to do first up. And we're going to basically do that by discussing the single most important, exciting, sexy thing in all of Excel. And this is a really important thing to get your head around immediately. And that is the best thing in the world, pivot tables. Pivot tables are beautiful. We don't need recommended pivot tables. I can figure it out by myself. Thank you very much, Excel. So let's get a pivot table underway. Brilliantly, it's figured out what I wanted to do already. If it hadn't done, by the way, the easy way to actually move your cursor and select big items in Excel is if you're holding down Control and Shift, then basically tap right, then it will go as far to the right as it can find something, as well as selecting it, and then just tap down while still holding Control and Shift, and it'll go right down to the bottom. So then that's all 2,593 rows selected. So that creates a pivot table covering all of this data. Now, why do we want a pivot table? Let's start things off nice and flipping simple here. So one of the questions that actually showed up there was, do you ever watch the MATN live streams? And people answer different things. So obviously it would be useful to be able to group all the people that answer different things together so we can understand roughly what the distribution was. So what we need to do now is we need to build a pivot table. A pivot table will be built automatically by Excel, and you basically provide a couple of bits of information for it. You can basically provide what's going to be on the rows, what's going to be on the columns, what's the actual value reflected in the table, and then add some filters, i.e. to kind of filter down the data a little bit. So what we want to know here is, do you watch the MATN live streams? So I'm going to grab this up here and I'm going to move it down to rows. And that's now going to group together all the actual possible answers. So the 4 answers, I have but not often, no I haven't, regularly, or yes always. Fine, so I now know what the 4 actual available responses are. Now that's not so important here, but in something like, say, what country do you live in, where it was like a free texting where people could type what they wanted to, that's actually going to be useful, because right now I don't know how many different answers there are. So as a result, if I put it into a pivot table, I'd be able to find that out. So hang on, if I just actually take that now and just do that very quickly, we'll just kind of pull that out. We'll take one of the other ones. What's your favorite video game? So I can bring this into rows, and would you believe there's quite a lot of flipping answers. Quite a lot of answers, in fact. So you know what? We'll deal with that one later. So let's get that one out of there for the time being and bring Do You Ever Watch the MHN live streams back up. Now that I have a bunch of row labels, I now need to actually provide a bit of data. And that's what the box on the bottom right is for, values. So now I need to take basically a field I'm not using that's populated under all circumstances. Everyone's got a timestamp because basically a timestamp was generated at the point at which they created the survey. So as a result, we can just use flipping timestamps. So just grab that and move that over to here. Now, the thing you've got to watch out for is that can either basically be, if we kind of click on it, then go into valued field settings, that can basically be either sum or count. On this occasion, I want a count, because all I want to know is how many people actually have done each of these things. So a count is absolutely 100% fine. By the way, if there's basically nothing you can use for values, because everything's in use as a filter or a column or a row, you can just literally create like a new column that you just call fake, and then everything literally has 1 against it, and that's absolutely fine, because then if I just basically go into my pivot table, go into Analyze and select Choose Data Source, because now it doesn't include that table, because that's been added onto the end. Now if I just reselect the data, fake will now appear over here. So if I wanted to actually move this back out of the way, I could move fake down here into values. And because fake basically, actually sum works for that, but on this occasion I'm going to make it count again just to make sure, just in case there was a 2 somewhere. Now I know that I can use everything else. If I wanted to use timestamp as a column, for example, or whatever, if I want to make the data a bit more complex, then that's absolutely fine. So now I've got a reliable way of counting all this data, which is really, really nice and flipping easy. So say you're perfectly happy with that, and now you just want to make it a bit more visible. Because yeah, that's kind of what we're all going for here. It's not just about basically making the data readable, it's also about making it accessible so someone at a glance can understand what's going on. So over in the pivot table analyze, you've got yourself a pivot chart. So you can basically just generate a chart out of this pivot table, nice and simple. So on this occasion, probably a pie chart would actually be a useful thing to do. So we'll just convert that, and there we go. And now we know for a fact that the most common response with 52% of the respondents is I have watched live stream, but not often, followed up by regularly, and then sort of not at all or always are roughly the same. So that at a glance is a super simplified, easy look at what a pivot table is and why it's useful. But that's really just scratching the absolute flipping surface. Let's just get rid of this and do something a bit more interesting. You see, what makes pivot tables really, really special is that you're not just dealing with a single axis. The fact is you've got this lovely little thing, columns, up here. I mean, you can actually bring 2 axes into this and start looking at data in a lot more of an interesting fashion. So let's just instead move this over here. Yeah, do you ever watch the MHN live streams? Let's move that over into columns, because there's only 4 of those. And instead, let's bring something a bit more interesting down into the actual rows. So in this case, what country do you live in? So we've got ourselves, oh, blimey. Well, someone lives in a very, very interesting country indeed, don't they? You see, and straight away, we've run into a bit of a problem here. Let's just flipping zoom out for a second there. There we go. You've probably noticed there's quite a few flipping countries, and in some ways, this isn't actually the most helpful thing in the world. So, let's start off by simplifying this a bit, because we don't always actually need every single item, because some things, like an okay one, are not actually that useful. So let's just click on this little arrow here and start filtering this down a little bit. And we'll go into value filters, because what I want to do is just be focusing on the big countries. Not because big countries are more important, but because if the kind of the number of respondents you've got is sufficiently small, you won't be able to get good data out of it, because you'll get weird anomalous results. Like you'll be able to say, oh my goodness, literally 100% of the people that live in Antarctica view the live streams, because one person from Antarctica will respond to the query and they happen to watch the live stream. It's not that helpful. So let's go into value filters and now say you're only really eligible to be part of this pivot table if you're part of a country that has more than, shall we say, 10 respondents. Let's just kind of set the threshold for entry pretty darn low, all things considered. There we are. That's looking much more sensible already, and now we can actually start zooming in. But all of a sudden, an immediate secondary problem has jumped out at us, which is, I've kind of skipped an important first stage here. We'll get to that in a bit more detail later, but I've basically skipped data cleaning. Data cleaning is very, very important, because when you give people the freedom to type what they want, they type rubbish. Sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's malicious, and sometimes it's just that there's multiple ways to put the same thing. So, for example, some people are part of England versus the United Kingdom versus the UK versus Wales and England and all sorts. So basically, we've just got to start grouping some of these together, and that's fine. That's going to be pretty easy to do, all things considered, because when you're cleaning up data, you can either just basically delete it, that's one option, or you can just do a really simple find and replace. So let's just basically take everyone who said England and let's kind of say they're actually from the UK instead. Beautiful. So we've made 319 replacements there. Let's just do the same for the other nations of the United Kingdom just to make sure all these people are grouped together. And now we just need to do the same thing with the USA. So we'll replace United States of America, and just straight up America, I'll assume is supposed to refer to the USA. But I've just caused a bit of a problem there, which is I've replaced the United States of America now with the USA of America. So I should probably just fix that nice and quickly too. Lovely. Yeah, sometimes this is, that's better. That's much more flipping like it. Right, that's not perfect, but just a quick kind of swing and a sense check. It looks like I've significantly improved the data here. So what I want to do now is come back to my pivot table, go over to Analyze, and now if I just refresh it, immediately it rereads the data and updates itself automatically. Again, another really useful thing about pivot tables, when you make changes to the actual raw data, just hit refresh, everything updates. So now everything looks like it's making a lot more flipping sense. There's two Australias that look identical to me, but okay, fine, I'm not sure what the difference between you two is. Also, there's two separate UKs. Why are there two separate UKs? I'm going to replace Australia with Australia to see if that fixes it. Well, it's done something. Any chance that's worked? No, that has done nothing. Never mind, there's just two Australias and two UKs and I'm not sure why. So right here we've got the seeds of something potentially quite interesting, which is we've got now broken down by country what people's propensity is to either definitely attend a live stream, never attend a live stream, or sometimes attend a live stream to varying degrees. But right now, at a glance, it's not exactly the easiest thing to know what's going on with this table. So this is probably the point where we want to actually pull the data out of the table and start playing with it ourselves. So this all starts off pretty simply. Basically, I'm just going to say, okay, so if I want to recreate this data over here so I can start playing with it myself, then I just basically type equals and then click on this cell over here. And then it'll just copy Australia out of this cell over here. Well, that's nice and marvellous and easy, isn't it? So basically now I can just do this and everything's flipping lovely and the world is magnificent and the USA managed to sneak in. Okay, fine, we'll just ignore those other two and just basically go with the big USA, it's okay. But here's the problem with pivot tables, they're a little bit on the fussy and sniffy side, and they're allowed to be because they're fabulous, so it's okay. Because if I just basically say equals and then click on this number right here, you notice all of a sudden the formula gets a little bit confused, quite frankly, and then I'll say things like, okay, so if I drag that down, oh, that's still 51. It's still obsessed with trying to figure out what's going on here. Generally, it's not a good idea. So instead, we want to basically do something a little bit different to get this data out of this here chart. Now you can cheat the system, by the way. You can just literally type in equals B5, which is the relevant cell, and it will read the data. But let's not do that, because that then would be a terrible idea. Because what happens if I decide to overwrite this at some point and decide, actually, I want this line to be the UK? Well, then all of a sudden, the UK's got 51 against it, which isn't right in the slightest. Basically, what we also want to cover today is we want to make everything as automated as possible. Everything ought to be as completely automated as it can be. So what we're going to do instead is we're now going to do our first little bit of slightly more interesting formula stuff in Excel. We're going to start off with something, maybe not the simplest thing in the world, but equally not the most complicated. We're going to do a VLOOKUP. A VLOOKUP basically says, Excel, look at something that I'm telling you and then find it inside a table of more complex data. So what we're going to do is we're just going to type equals VLOOKUP right here. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to give Excel something we want it to find. So on this occasion, I wanted to find the word Australia. Marvellous. So we can just find the word Australia, or indeed it will find whatever is currently written inside that cell. So if I change what's written inside that cell, Excel will be able to keep up with me. Next, I need to actually give it a range in which it's going to try and find that word, and also where it's going to pull its answer from. So that's fine. I'm just going to select the actual pivot table itself. Absolutely marvellous. And there's no reason not to. I may as well actually just pull this right down, because then if in future, when I rerun this and there's more countries I want to bring in, I'll actually be able to find it, even if it's way further down, so that's absolutely fine as well. Just put another comma in to indicate I'm happy with that range I've just entered. Lovely. Next, the column index number. That basically means within the actual data set you have selected, what do you want to return? So if I were to type 1, it would return the word Australia, because that basically means the same column that you actually started in. 2 would return this column here, 3 this one here, 4, 5, 6, etc. So I want to basically have I have but nope, so that's absolutely 100% fine. So how about we actually return? Actually, you know what? No. Let's make this a little bit more interesting, because right now, the order here is not really that useful, is it? I have but not often, nope, regularly, and yes always. Well, that's not the most sensible thing at all. So rather than returning the I have but not often, let's actually have it instead return the third option, nope. Let's start off with nope right there, because then we'll be able to read it in the right order. That'll be marvellous. Another comma to indicate I'm done with that section. And then range lookup, where you write false if you want it to actually return the answer, or true if you just want something vaguely close to the answer. I literally always type false, and I'm not sure why this is even a thing that gets really brought up. So now we just enter this right here. And now it has returned 13, because yes, as you can see there, I've asked it look up Australia, find it inside this range, then return the thing that's third along in the range I've given you, and actually get it right on this occasion. Marvellous. So now what I can do is basically I can actually type nope up here. In fact, actually, you know what, I'll just kind of, just to save time, I'll just basically say you correspond to that, and then we will actually set this up to basically say I have but not often, the third most regular, then the second most regular, and then finally yes always. Marvellous. So having done that, I should just be able to grab this and basically pull this down, and then it will basically work for everything. Which it does, but not quite in the way you're expecting, because I have indeed done something wrong quite intentionally there. Which is now if I just kind of open up one of these, for example, you'll notice that actually, even though it's reading the right thing, and it does actually find it, yeah, now unfortunately, the actual table range has slipped down. Now that would be a problem if we added more and more data in later. So what we want to do instead is basically, in Excel, dollars are magic. Dollars, basically, if you put dollars next to something, a coordinate, a letter, or a number, then it basically says, do not allow this to move under any circumstances. So we're just going to basically add dollars around all of this, and now if I drag this down, there we are. So the blue number does drag down and drags down to here and drags down to here. So the cell basically keeps looking up the cell next to it, but the table remains unchanged. Marvellous. And the other nice thing now is I can basically take this code, I can just basically copy that there, and I can slap it in here next. Oh, we can just close that up a little bit too. So now we can just slap this straight into here. And there's only one thing we need to change at this point, which is I need to change what actual column we're looking up. So I have but not often now corresponds in fact to 2. So I just need to change the 3 up here to a 2. I am not looking here anymore. I'm not looking over here instead. So that becomes a 2, and then we can just do exactly the same thing along here, and then along here. So then regularly becomes, that is 4. So we'll just modify this up here to 4, and then yes always becomes a 5. Lovely, and now the data is in the right order. And now we should be able to pull all this down, and that data should be... Just give it a quick sense check. I think I've got that correct. Marvellous. So basically we've just switched these two round, so now it makes a little bit more sense. Fine. Again, nice, and if I want to, and I just want to kind of change this, and like, you know, I decide to, you know, I only want like 5 countries and I want to manually type them in. If I'm just kind of curious in like getting the UK's data and I can't be bothered to look up the UK, I can just type UK in here, and it auto-updates for me. Marvellous. Now, the reason that we wanted it to do that, by the way... Oh, and I should, by the way, also just pull out a total, just for the sake of actually having one of those too. So we'll just bring one of those in, and now we want the final stage, which would be, yep, that will just be a 6. Because we'll have the final row over, which is the grand total of all. Marvellous. So we'll just kind of quickly pull that in. Great. So now what we need to do is basically put this data in a bit more of a useful format. So we've got data in the right order now, but it's still not readable. You can't look at that and immediately think, oh, well, there's an interesting finding there. And if data is presented in such a way as you can't look at it and immediately kind of think, yes, I can see what the point is, then the data hasn't been analysed or automated or visualized properly, so it should be. So probably the best thing we can do now is convert this data into a proportion, because then we're starting to get into what we typically call insights, taking the data and actually pulling something usable out of it. So let's just quickly pull some of this around again. I'm just going to basically use a quick equals just to actually grab all of this stuff. Marvellous, thank you very much. You see, what we want to do now is basically we want to figure out, by country, is there a higher or lower propensity towards actually being able to attend or not attend the live stream? Because my working theory would be the countries for whom the live streams are at convenient hours, primarily Europe and America, are probably going to be more likely to attend. As we head further east, however, towards Eastern Europe and any part of Asia, and especially Australia, probably there's going to be a lower propensity to attend, purely on grounds that it's at appalling o'clock, like the live streams start at like, I don't know, 1 a.m. or something and run to like 4 or 5 a.m. And the Australians that do come deserve special medals, quite frankly. So let's start rendering this as a percentage, because then we'll get around the problem that it's very hard to compare absolute numbers when the actual base number, the grand total, is different for each country. So let's very just quickly and simply say, okay, so let's just figure out the proportion of people that are not attending at all out of the Australians. So equals 13 divided by 79. Lovely, we've got ourselves a number, and then just hit the percentage button up here, render that as a percentage. Very, very nice indeed. Now, once again, we're going to want to use dollars. If I just add a couple of dollars in here, that I can very simply just drag, and that will populate the entire table in seconds. Now, this is where it occasionally takes a little bit of kind of pausing and thinking. So you need to make sure your dollars are in the right place. In Excel, if you have a problem and your table starts returning value, out of cheese error, and 99% of the time it's just you put a dollar in the wrong place. So let's just stick a dollar in there, drag that along, and that seems to add up to 100%. You can see the sum at the bottom there, so that's probably a good sign. Pull that down. Let's see if that actually works as well. That probably does. Beautiful. We can probably at this point also just start kind of culling some data, to be honest. So the various kind of replications of the US can go down. We can kind of get rid of a few of them nice and quickly. So this is normally the point where I'd probably give conditional formatting a go to see what that actually does. Conditional formatting up here basically just says you apply a color scale to some cells to see if it makes it immediately a lot more readable. So in this occasion, basically I'm saying, okay, a high number means good and a red number means bad. But if I apply it to the whole thing, it's a little bit confusing, because you notice that, say over on the right on the Netherlands there, 15% of people from the Netherlands said, yes, I always attend. But that's being flagged in a bad color because the percentage is still quite low. So that doesn't feel like that's the right result either. Now we could just put a standard red, yellow, green colour scale where high is bad and thus red, because this is the nope column. But again, that doesn't strike me as the most useful thing in the world. So probably on this occasion, the percentage maybe isn't working out, or at least in this form it isn't. So how about instead we try something else? Let's try actually charting this to see if we can get anything out of that. So I always am fond of a lovely stacked bar graph. I love a good stacked bar graph. Stacked bar graphs are marvellous. Now the chart's starting to be a little bit more helpful here, because we have indeed managed to confirm something that I did suspect would be the case, which is Australia. I thought they would be less likely to attend, and indeed the two responses of I never attend the live streams or I have but not often make up over 80% of the actual respondents from Australia, which basically doesn't happen anywhere else apart from France. Possibly they're annoyed at some of the French jokes I crack when Claire's around, I'm not sure. But other than France and Australia, everyone else is much more likely to show up. But how about instead we create something that's possibly a little bit more on the interesting side? I'm going to create a propensity to attend score, which I think might be arguably a little bit more useful, because so far I've not been able to do anything other than confirm that Australia and France are less likely to show up than anyone else. Fine, that's useful, because I never would have got that just by glancing at this table or this table. So we've made some progress, but if we could actually rank the countries in terms of propensity to attend, that could potentially be of interest too. So I'm probably going to do that by assigning scores to each of the states. Nope, I have been not often, regularly, and yes always, and then basically create an average out of all of that. So let's say for the sake of argument that nope is worth 1 point, I have been not often is worth 2, regularly is worth 3, and yes always is worth 4. And those are just going to be the scores we associate with this. Now to save time and space, I'm just going to do this in a single cell. So what we're basically going to say is we're simply going to, and this will also be useful because yes, now I've got a smaller selection of countries, so I'm going to have to use another VLOOKUP here. So we start off with a nice simple VLOOKUP, and the VLOOKUP I want you to do is I want you to look up Australia, or rather look up whatever's in this cell, which on this occasion happens to be Australia. The table that we actually want them to actually look that up in is going to be this big old table over here, and again we may as well just kind of bring it down a bit further in case the table expands in future. That's absolutely fine. And while we're passing by, of course, do not forget to just slap those dollars on, because the dollars will stop the table shifting. Very, very nice indeed. Now, we want it to return what's in the nope column, so we'll just enter a 2, because 1 would return Australia itself, and then finally we enter false. So that basically just gives us a very simple VLOOKUP that's just going to return 13 again. Or rather, in this case, a percentage, because it happens to have been set as a percentage, because I set this whole error to a percentage. But let's not worry about that. Now it's back to 13. Except that's not the only thing I need it to do. I'm going to put that VLOOKUP itself in brackets, because I want to actually conduct an operation on that number. Once we pull back that 13, I need that 13 to be multiplied by the score associated with 1 or nope. I need it to be multiplied by that there K3. So close the brackets. Always make sure you close brackets if you open them. And in addition, the K3 is also going to need... No, don't go away from there. The K3 is also going to need some dollars. Because when I drag this down, the K3 basically needs to hold in its current position. So that's fine. Just slap $1 there. That should be 100% fine. So that gets us the 13. But now what we need to do is basically also add in a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm just going to literally copy this formula right here, and I'm going to add in a new thing. So I'm just going to add that in, and now I'm going to slap that down a second time. But this time I'm going to modify it slightly. I'm still VLOOKUPing up. I'm still looking up Australia. I'm still looking in the same range. But this time I want you to find what's third across. I need you to multiply that by what's actually sitting inside L3 on this occasion. So now we're just going to change that, thank you. And that's now returning the number 115. So let's just quickly sense check that. So 51 times 2 would be 102. 102 plus 13 would indeed be 115. So the formula so far is absolutely working fine. And now I'm just going to basically do that another 2 times. So now we're just going to add that on. We're going to slap this down. And now I'm just going to do that again. We're just going to change that 2 this time to a 4. And this time the K gets changed over to an M. And now we just do that a fourth and final time. And once again, still VLOOKUP, still Australia, still the same range. But now we're going over to 5. And now we're multiplying that by N3. Lovely. And that's now returning 164. And just a quick sense check at the bottom, that is indeed returning the right number. Fine. So this rather complicating looking thing is now actually producing a score, or rather the combined total. However, that is not actually the score I need. Instead, what I'm going to now do is take absolutely all of that flipping stuff there. We're just going to wrap all of that together. And then we're going to divide that by the actual total. So once again, one final VLOOKUP there, but this time, one we can get rid of that, that's fine. And we're looking at the final line, the total in 6. I just got something wrong, but luckily Excel's extremely good at correcting me. Probably I simply failed to close the brackets there. So that is now returning a score of 2, or rather, let's actually get that to, 2.08. So if I've actually set up my brackets correctly, I should just be able to drag this down now. And indeed I can. So that is now every country scored on its propensity to attend. Now that we can put some conditional formatting on right now, and we can see which countries are more or less likely to actually attend, i.e. they have more people skewing towards high numbers and less people skewing towards low numbers. So we can see bottom of the barrel is in fact actually, interestingly, France, even lower than Australia, though Australia understandably, because the time zone does indeed come a little bit on the low side. Top of the class, meanwhile, falls interestingly to Europe, and indeed more in the realms of Central Europe. Absolute top of the class is in fact the Netherlands, followed very, very closely by Germany, and then Sweden, and finally Belgium. So well done, Central Europe. You as a time zone have really been holding the flipping end up quite nicely. Well done indeed. UK, I'm disappointed in you. You're falling well behind, and indeed the US even flipping worse. Buck your ideas up, guys. Now that was just a really brief introduction. And what I like about the system I've set up is basically it is indeed fully automated. So if someone just basically comes in here and types in any country that they choose, it gives you the actual score as a result. If you want to, if you want to just kind of type in more countries and then just kind of, if you want to just compare 2, you just grab this, drag it down, it works. It just works, and that's how good Excel should be. Good Excel should just work. But this is in fact a very simple introduction to things. Now, for the second half, I'm going to move into something a lot more complicated. You see, the reason this data set was quite easy was because basically it involved a single event, a single snapshot in time. At one precise moment, I simply said to people, okay, what are your opinions on these various open-ended questions? And sure, you can basically kind of, compare them in various interesting ways and come up with some interesting insights, but it's never going to be that complicated because you're dealing with a single snapshot in time. Now, to make things a little bit more interesting, I also asked the people who filled out this survey to fill out a second section where I basically invented a fake product called Tabby Box, which is basically Loot Box, except we send you pictures of Tabby and like fluff that Tabby's left on the sofa and like claws that she's left in her scratching rug and like whatever else, like, toys she's chewed on, stuff like that. We just send you Tabby stuff. Now, that's a lot more interesting. Subscription services are fascinating, and the data you start digging out of them is very, very interesting indeed. So basically, inside this fake scenario, I asked people to basically invent a date where they started their free Tabby Box trial, where they heard about Tabby Box, following the free trial, whether they actually decided to convert to a full paid membership and subscription or not. If they did, whether they're still a member or whether they cancelled at some point, and if they did not, what was wrong with their free trial Tabby Box that meant they actually dropped out at that point. Now, this is suddenly an awful lot more interesting because we've got a whole bunch of dates involved. So people joined at certain points and then may or may not have decided to actually go on to join the main product, and then they'll have hung around in the system for a certain length of time. With this sort of information, this is where we can start making some really, really fun stuff. Because once again, right now, this data is basically impenetrable. It's pretty much useless to absolutely everybody. But the first thing we need to do with this data before we start off, and the step I kind of, skipped last time just because I wanted to kind of just dig in to doing Excel-y stuff, because I wanted, a really exciting in media res kind of start to my Excel video, damn it, and I'm sure you'll agree that's what we managed to achieve. We need to do data cleaning. Data cleaning is very, very important because when you give a large number of people a survey of some description and there's open text fields where they can write what they want, people will just fluff it up. Some people are dicks, some people are idiots, and some people have worked too long in QA, and when they're given an open text field, like basically putting the most random stuff in it they can just to see if they can break it. So if we just tap filter up here and basically have a quick glance at what's hidden in here, basically, yeah, so there's a few people that decided that they actually signed up to their free Tabby Box in the year 9,999. Lots of other people, yep, signed up in the future. Then we get into the sensible people who actually signed up during years that actually makes sense. Then we get to the people who decided to see how far back they could go, and indeed turns out it was about 1900. Then we get into the people who've entered, I don't even know what they managed to enter, but they managed to completely screw up the system so that Excel doesn't even recognize it as a date anymore. So that's just flipping marvelous. So we need to basically clean those people out immediately before we get going, because it's pretty important that all of the data does actually have a really nice proper date format. It'll save a lot of time later because the pivot table doesn't like it when you try and mix date and not date formats. So let's just very quickly actually sort these from oldest to newest, and we can actually start stripping some stuff out. Because we know, for example, that many tuners only started existing in 2013. So basically, anyone who claims that they actually got their Tabby Box before about May of 2013 is almost certainly lying, therefore, because it was indeed, yeah, that's the day before. That's the day before it existed. So probably, literally all of these people need to have their entries purged immediately. Now instead, let's kind of flip it around and say, okay, let's go from newest to oldest. And now we've got a bunch of people who've managed to enter all sorts of crazy stuff. So this person managed to enter a format that's not even recognized as a date. They managed to get back to 1888, marvelous, and Excel doesn't even like that as a date anymore. Meanwhile, over here, they then went on in 1988 to actually cancel their Tabby Box. So that person's probably not useful for the data analysis. So how about we just get rid of all of this too? Marvelous. Together with the people in the year 9,999, they can probably go as well. We can just get rid of everybody in the future. You know what will be nice? Everyone who actually managed to get in before the end of October, they can all live as well. So all of that data can now go. We're just going to do the same actually on the other date range just to make sure that's all okay. Beautiful. So now we just want to arrange this. And once again, we've got some people who are still floating around in the data who have actually got some fake stuff in there. So I'm just going to repeat the process. You see, this wouldn't help someone who actually signed up to their Tabby Box in 2015 and then cancelled it in 1962. That's not helpful in the slightest. Right, that's hopefully all the fake dates and whatever actually cleared out of this thing, because yes, now starting with about, 2,600 odd entries, we're down to a count of 2,200. So we had to basically scrap 400 straight away, purely on grounds that people entered nonsense. This is what happens when you give people freedom on the internet. A good 15% of them decide to abuse it as far as possible. Also, here's another very helpful tip that's not always necessary but is still useful. Once you've done data cleaning, I strongly suggest that what you do is you take your now lovely clean data and you simply take it away and you move it into a new sheet. Because sometimes there's just sort of ghosts in the machine and like old data you've deleted will still occasionally keep showing up in pivot tables. It's safer just to take it once it's clean and move it into a nice fresh spreadsheet. So, welcome to a lovely fresh spreadsheet here, and by the way, get into the habit of always naming your tabs, because there's going to be a load of tabs, and oh, it's very appropriate in the tabby box document, there's going to be lots of tabs. Always get into the habit of using multiple tabs to keep things clean, and name your tabs so you actually know what's going on. So this is the raw data tab right over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this straight over into a pivot table. And there's a very important reason for that, because when you move basically well-formatted date data into a pivot tables start being really bloody clever with it, assuming you formatted it and cleaned it properly. So let's just set up a pivot table right here, lovely. So right over here, we've got ourselves a new thing. I'm just going to move that over to the right, and I'm going to rename it pivot, lovely. So we've got ourselves a new pivot table here. So just grab what date did your free tabby box trial begin and move that down to rows. And you'll see straight away that Excel rather cleverly has already figured out, yes, this is dates. So as a result, what we're going to start doing immediately is we're going to start actually wrapping all of this up into beautiful years and quarters. So if we just kind of turn off quarters here, we might be able to get away with just doing this with months actually. We'll actually have to see how much data there is. I might want to wrap this up into quarters. Normally I would just do it month by month, or you might even do it like, you know, right down to the day if you really desperately wanted to. The thing is, because I've only got like 2,200 data points to work with, I might want to wrap this up into quarters. So I'll have a quick look at that. So basically, Excel's figured out straight away, okay, that's date. So we're going to actually start wrapping that up for you into years and months, which is very bloody convenient of it. Now next up, we either need to create a new field or we can just pick a field. Now, a required question was, where did you hear about TabbyBox? So we're not just going to be using that imminently, so let's just grab that and shove that in values, and Excel will automatically figure out you probably want a count of that. So now we know straight away how many people within each year, and then broken down to each month within that year, how many people basically began their free TabbyBox trial. Though, to be honest, I don't really like the fact that's not labelled correctly. So what I'm probably going to do, actually, is I'm just going to remove that. I'm just going to create a new kind of column purely for that purpose. So we're just going to call that total TabbyBox trials. Now this data doesn't actually need to do anything useful, because this is literally just going to be sitting in a pivot table. So I can literally basically replicate the data that we've got here. And if you just click on the little kind of button in the bottom right, then that automatically copies down to the bottom. So that's all absolutely fine. So just go back to my pivot table, and you may recall, just go over to Analyze. I can't refresh because refreshing kind of just covers the data that's already in the table. If I just kind of instead just do this, refresh that, lovely. So now, as a result, total TabbyBox trials is now available. Drag that down into values. That's now the same, but now it's actually labeled correctly. So those are the total counts of people broken down by month that decided they wanted to try out TabbyBox. Lovely. Now at this point in this entirely fake fictional business, we're probably going to be most interested in figuring out, okay, of the people that decided to take out free TabbyBox trials, what proportion of them actually went on to become paid TabbyBox members, and once they became TabbyBox members, how long did they stay in system? Because that starts becoming really important for the financials of the actual business. Once you've got that, you can start coming up with some really interesting stuff. So that's what we actually need this for. We've got here, when did you cancel your TabbyBox membership? Unfortunately, right now, we've just got a couple of dates. So we need to convert those dates into something a little bit more on the useful side. So we need to go back into our raw data, and we need to basically manually add in some extra columns. So now what we need to basically figure out is, how long was somebody's subscription? So we know, for example, that their actual free membership started here, and then we know they cancelled their TabbyBox membership. If they went on to become a member, they might have selected no and not done so here. So now we need to figure out what their time in system was. Now for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to ever so slightly simplify this, because of course, like, there would actually in real life be issues of, okay, when you sign up at a certain point during the month, your box will be sent at the end of that month. There'll be a cutoff date after which you won't be able to be in that month, and you roll over to next month. We're going to ignore all of that, and we're going to create a slightly simplified version of this business just for the sake of the Excel spreadsheet, which is the important thing, of course. So we're going to create a new column here that's going to be membership length in days. So what we should be able to do immediately is basically say, because Excel is pretty clever, we can simply say, okay, equals, and then give it a date. So on this occasion, the date is the 31st of October 2017, basically indicating, hey, someone is still in system. And then we simply say minus the actual date where they started their trial. And that will now actually give us a total number of days in system, except we need to make a bit of a tweak to that because that was your first free Tabby Box trial. So that first box was not in fact the one that they actually paid for. We're worried about full memberships here. So just for the sake of argument and to make this as realistic as possible, I'm going to take that number and then I'm going to deduct 30. So I'm just going to say, let's just say you get sent your first box, like it's shipped the moment you sign up, and then rather than there being a big ship at the end of the month, you're literally sent it like on the anniversary, either month anniversary, the same day of the month, every single month. So let's just deduct off 30, and then we've got ourselves a true membership length in days. Now let's just copy that down, and we'll immediately start running into some problems here. Like straight away it looks all right, because these people up here are the people who basically signed up on day one. Literally that's the day many a true nerd started, and they're still in system. These here are the good eggs. But as we scroll down, we're going to start running into problems. So we've got showing up straight away a couple of minuses showing up, suggesting something's gone very wrong. Now there's two different reasons for that. One is, yeah, this person said no rather than yes. So as a result, there's no actual date for them to cancel their membership because there was no membership. So as a result, this is just a massively high minus number. Meanwhile, this other number is a bit more complicated for me to have to deal with because that's a person who basically signed up and then cancelled immediately. So they called me up and they wanted a refund. So presumably, they never actually received their first Tabby box. So effectively, what we probably ought to do is, okay, we can fix this with just a little bit of logic going on here. So let's just quickly surround this in brackets so this is all wrapped together. So what we want to do is say straight away that if, so we're going to introduce a new bit of logic here. We're now basically introducing a logical test into our spreadsheet where we're going to say, okay, Excel, check whether something is actually true or not. If it is true, return something. If it is not true, return a different thing. So basically, I just want to say, hey, Excel, check whether that number is greater than 0, because it probably ought to be greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, then plain and simple, you can basically replicate what we just had there. Because if it's greater than 0, then that's absolutely flipping fine, and you can just do that. So then we can just basically have the answer again. If, however, the answer is not greater than 0, then something's clearly gone wrong, and the membership length was effectively, it may as well be 0. So what we're going to put there is we're going to put a 0 down, we're going to close this, and we're going to see if that works. So that still works at the top there, and now I'm just going to double click on the button to copy that down, and we're just going to start going down here, and if I'm right, there should now be no minus numbers. All the minus numbers should have been replaced with a 0. However, we kind of want to separate out the people who cancelled immediately and thus never actually had a paid membership from the people who... Actually, do we need to do that? For the sake of this, we probably don't. In an actual spreadsheet, obviously, we treat those two people as separate because someone who never converted in the first place is different from someone who converted and then wanted a refund. And you'd probably treat them differently because you'd treat the second group of people as potentially a target for remarketing in some capacity. And you'd probably think you might be able to, with say like a price reduction, be able to lure them back in for more Tabby boxes. Yes, sorry, I used to work in marketing. I used to be evil. Sorry about that. So hopefully that should now all be fine. And if we're right here, there should be no minuses. There should be no zeros. It looks all fine to me. Let's just quickly just slap a filter on this here column just to see whether it's actually working correctly. And the number should basically be, yeah, that looks reasonable. Because that's up to 1,588 days, which is acceptable. That's probably a viable number. That's probably someone who joined on day 1 and is still in system. That's the biggest number going. And everyone else has a number between 0 and 1,588. Marvellous. Now that's fine, but there's going to be a problem with that. If we just kind of go back over to the pivot table here and just update our pivot source. You see, we've got membership length days here, so logically we now want to slap that into the columns, but unfortunately that means there's a little bit too much data. Yeah, the chart just got too big. The chart got unfortunately uselessly big. Now, we're probably therefore going to want to be making some quick changes here. So the first thing we want to do now is probably go back over here and say we now want to convert that into months. So let's just add a new column in here. Now you're probably thinking that like a good starting point to this would just be to say, okay, we'll just take that and we'll divide it by 30. That's probably close enough to something that's true, and that's a good starting point, but we've got a few problems here. One, there's decimal places, and that's just going to cause problems, because then things that are very, very close to each other are still going to have masses of decimal places, and that's not going to be very, very helpful indeed. So what we actually need to do instead is basically, I'm just going to pull this across, and we are going to create membership length months, but this time it is going to be clean, which just basically means, yeah, it's the version that actually works. We're now going to use the round function. So you can basically round down, or round up. So basically, I want to round down, because if someone's been a member for 52.9 months, the number of boxes they've received, which is the important thing, is 52. Until it actually hits 53, they have not received the 53rd box. That means they're like 93% of the way through their personal monthly cycle. So as a result, we probably want to always round down. So round down this number, set the number of decimal places. I want to set that as 0. That gets rid of all those ugly, ugly decimals. And now we're in good shape. So now we just copy that down there. And now we've got much more manageable number of months in system. Very, very good indeed. So let's just quickly pull membership days out of there and instead pull membership months clean into here. And we've got the beginnings of something very beautiful here. We've got the beginning of something very, very beautiful indeed. I think we could probably zoom in. Actually, then we kind of cut off the bottom. Now let's just kind of keep it at 80%. So we've got the beginnings of something beautiful. Something utterly, utterly beautiful here, which is, this is the first step on the road to cohorting. Cohorting basically means you take a group of people who joined at a particular moment in time and then you follow them on their journey. And that's going to be very, very important if we're treating Tabbybox as a business. And from that, and from what we can get out of this rather beautiful little pivot table, we're actually going to be able to create some really, really interesting bits of data about this entirely fictitious business, which is marvelous. Just in case you're kind of seeing this and your eyes are kind of going slightly cross because you're not sure what you're looking at, basically what you're seeing here is each individual month's journey through Tabbybox. So let's just pick the very first one here. So basically there are 96 people associated with Tabbybox in the month of May 2013. Of those 96 people, 21 never actually had full memberships. Either they opted no and decided not to actually have a paid membership, or they joined as a paid member, but then they actually cancelled or refunded before we had a chance to send the first box to them at the end of their first full month paying. So as a result, 21 people drop off immediately. And then after that point, we're now tracking where everyone else is. So after that, everyone stayed in system for ages because nothing's happening on this row. One person here, after 16 months, or indeed 16 boxes, decided to actually drop out at that point. Then a few months later, 2 more people dropped out. 2 months later, another person dropped out. These 2 people dropped out. And then at the very, very end here, still in system, are 40 people. Those people remain in our system currently. So in other words, they remain active paying members. And then obviously, as we go down, the reason it forms this shape is because people who have joined more recently can only have gone so far through because these represent months. So for example, a person over here who joined in May 2015, those people can only have got to month 29 because literally that's the number of months between May 2015 and now, which is why it forms this rather lovely pleasing shape right here. So you're probably thinking, that's nice, John, that's a really lovely shark fin of data right there, but how is this in any way useful? Well, this is where life gets sexy. Because this, ladies and gentlemen, as I open up a new tab and rename it, this is where we build the pyramid of data. And the pyramid of data is the sexiest bastard you will ever see in your data analyzing lives. It is absolutely beautiful. Because the thing is, this data is beautiful, but it's only the foundation. It's only the foundation upon which we actually need to build the real data. The real data is basically us keeping track of how many people are in system at any one time. Because this is telling us where people are dropping out and then how many there were at the end. So the data is not really constructed in the right way. It's all there, but it's not quite laid out correctly. So we need to build it a little bit better, which is why I'm going to move over into a new tab right now. So first up, we just kind of go over to a new tab and I just basically say, okay, let's start getting everything laid out correctly. You can borrow a row label from a pivot table. That's all absolutely fine. So we'll just kind of copy all this down. Fine. There we are. Grand total at the bottom. Lovely. And then we just copy this across as well. And then zoom out a little bit here. In fact, actually, zoom out a little bit for now because this is all stretched out too much and we can do better than that. So just basically highlight these things in Excel. If you just basically double click on the movie column thing, they all resize to the minimum viable size for what's currently there. We will need to expand them again afterwards in a little bit, but that'll do for the time being at least. I just want it to kind of, be a little bit more compact. Oh yeah, that's definitely too small. That's definitely just a tiny bit too small. Let's just extend all of those out just a little bit. Tiny bit more, bit too much. There we go. That's just flipping perfect. So let's start reformulating the data right now. So what we're basically trying to say here is, okay, 0. That is the number of people who have had 0 boxes, i.e. the people in system who don't really count for that much, to be honest, because they dropped out without paying. So what we need to do now is we need to basically start finding those people. But as we've discussed previously, you can't just actually say, oh, equals, and then I'm just going to click on a pivot table. That's going to be because it freaks out. It freaks out and starts being useless. Basically, don't do that. Instead, what we need to start doing now is we need to start being a little bit on the clever side. You see, just like last time, we have to start using VLOOKUPs. Though on this lookup, we actually need to use VLOOKUP's sexy twin sister, HLOOKUP. They're basically identical, they just do things in slightly different positions. So, what we need to do now is, 0 isn't quite right. Instead, 0 is not necessarily that useful to me. So what I'm actually going to do instead is I'm just going to actually take the grand total, and I'm just going to, yes, I know there's data there, that's 100% fine. Ooh, that was noise! Sorry, there's not been much noise other than me talking during this thing so far, but that was a flipping noise right there. Yeah, I need grand total up front. So what I'm basically going to do now is I'm just going to tell this thing to find something. So it's exactly the same principle. So HLOOKUP looks for a value in the top row of a table. Well, that's fine. So let's get that done. Open up some brackets. The thing I want it to look for is grand total. That's what it's looking for, right flipping there. Now, the range I want it to actually look for that in is obviously the pivot table itself. So basically, I just select the pivot table, and as I say, you may as well just kind of whack it out a little bit further, because as you add more data in, like say, next month, there's going to be a 53, and grand total is going to shuffle over from its BC column into BD. You may as well just future-proof yourself by just kind of whacking it way out into the middle of nowhere. Now, just like a VLOOKUP, basically you enter a number to say 1 is equivalent to that thing, and then, 2 is the next over, 3 is the next over, etc. On this occasion, 1 will be the equivalent of returning grand total, 2 is the next one down, 3, etc. So let's just enter 2, and then false, exactly the same as last time, and life is good. And that should now return, yes indeed, 162. Marvellous. Now, of course, before we go any further, just slap in those lovely dollars to make sure this thing doesn't move. But you've probably noticed we're going to start running into a problem pretty bloody quickly, which is that 2 right there. That 2 doesn't actually help us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a lovely fake little hidden column over here. So basically I'm going to type 2, 3, 4, and then I'm just going to drag that down right here. So now all the way down to the bottom, down to 51, and now I'm just going to amend this to basically get rid of the 2 and instead say don't use a 2, because otherwise when I drag this down it will just always be 2. Instead, use whatever is written right there in A3. Still returns the same result there. Very, very nice indeed. But now, when I drag this down, I've made a mistake. What's gone wrong? Exactly as I predicted earlier. Yeah, 99% of problems in Excel can just be resolved by just ever so slightly shuffling around your flipping dollar signs. I just needed a dollar here to stop that dragging downwards. Well, that's absolutely 100% fine. Let's just slap in a dollar right there. And now, this time when we drag this down, now it flipping works. So let's just quickly sense check that's working as it should do. So that should read 162, 96, 13, and 7. 162, 96, 13, and 7. Spot on. This is a good starting point right here. And I'm also just going to make a quick amendment to what I did previously. Just move that over because, yeah, we are still going to need that 0 right there. So this here can now basically be pulled down and cover literally everything. Marvellous, including the grand total at the very, very bottom there. So that there now by month is the total number of people that started off, or rather, to be precise, is our total number of trialers. It needs to say grand total there because that's what the HLOOKUP is reading off. However, that's not actually that helpful for a reader. So instead, what we're going to do is we're probably simply going to have up here That's going to be the actual label, and eventually we'll just hide this. So we can just grey that out, and actually this column over here can now be hidden. Just hide it away and no one will know it's there and everything's fine. And when we're done setting up this here spreadsheet, we'll simply hide this row as well and no one will know that's there and everything will make sense. So next up, we now need to exclude the people who either didn't convert or did convert, but we never actually managed to get them to convert properly. I.e. we never shipped them a box, we never charged their credit card. So what we need to do now is we need to take this number and then we need to deduct the next number across, because the next number in the pivot is the number of people in the 0 column, and the 0 column is everybody, because we've already wrapped them together into 0. You see, that was nice. We laid that out earlier, so now our life is simpler now because we cleaned the data properly at the beginning. Now we know that everyone who never actually paid is all grouped together. So now we basically just need to say, okay, so the next logical step is this group, but now we need to deduct something else. I'm just going to put a 1 there just as a placeholder, but what we can actually do is we can take this here thing and we can just convert it nice and simply. So get rid of that, shove that in there at this point, and now we just need to ever so slightly tweak this. Now the colours start being very, very helpful at this point, and this is something Excel's great at. So obviously we no longer want to look up grand total. What we want to look up instead is this here lovely 0. So A4 should still be fine. This might not work, but it might work. So according to this, if I've actually done that correctly, that number should now be 123. And indeed, a quick check at that, 162 minus 39, that is indeed correct. So this does appear to be working correctly, but it might need a bit more work before it's ready to be wrapped up over everything here. Let's just quickly check whether that's even worked correctly. No, that's now not working correctly. What's gone wrong here? Okay, so on this occasion, the B4 has been pulled out, and that should stay as A4. So that can't be allowed to move. So let's just quickly add in the dollar. It's always the dollars. It's always the dollars that screw you over. Let's see if that works correctly. Still 123. That is actually correct and should be correct. Pull this down. That strikes me as looking fairly reasonable. So now we should be in a position to basically just say, okay, let's just drag this down to the bottom right here. And now we just also pull this across to as far as it needs to go. Hang on, I need to zoom out one level because I can't see how far I need to actually go at this point. And now we've got something that's looking even flipping sexier. Now what we're doing is we're tracking people through system over time. This is basically a record of at any given moment how many people were actually in system because we've set it up in this way, and it's all automated. At this point, if I got another 300 responses, or if I redid the survey and people remember what they put in the update to their responses, we faked the data for next year, and I plugged that into the raw data tab and then refreshed my pivot table, all of this would now be 100% spot on. It would all update automatically because it's been set up and built to be automated, and that's the key to good Excel. It's automation, damn it. Now, time for a little bit of cleaning up here. The first thing we need to do in order to make this a little bit better is we need to just, well, actually, before I do that, I'm just going to say that equals that, and the reason is I do actually want to keep some labels going on somewhere, but if I just kind of slapped this down next to all of the Januaries, say, that would work very nicely. Next up, I want to actually hide all of the year totals, because they don't actually help us. They're kind of useful for summaries at a glance, but it's more helpful to us if we just hide all of those there. Very nice. Now, we've got kind of true data each month. I've also just realised, rather embarrassingly, I cut off all of 2017. I shouldn't have done that. Luckily, thanks to the way I've built this thing, it is remarkably easy to get the rest of 2017 out here. Just zoom out to make sure I've actually got the right thing there. So just bring some of that in. Beautiful. Oh, it's all broken. Hang on, what have I done wrong? Nice simple one. It's just that this value over here does not exist because I didn't pull it down far enough. Lovely. There we go. Now it all works perfectly. And that's the danger of automation. If just one little grayed out hidden thing breaks, the whole thing breaks. So it's not to be undertaken lightly, damn it. So now we've reformulated data into a more useful fashion, though we still haven't really made it, accessible at a glance. You might look at this and have no idea what it's trying to tell you. Well, that's fine. Now it's time to basically repeat the trick we tried in the very first bit of data, but this time it should be a lot more interesting. We're now going to basically create a diminishing returns pyramid using conditional formatting, just by converting all of this into a system of proportion of users remaining in system. Don't worry, it's fine, I'll explain it as we go. So what we need to start off with pretty simply is 100% of people who are the people who actually received their first box. So now let's just quickly say, yeah, May and in month 1. So in May and month 1, 100% of people who entered month 1 entered month 1. Pretty bloody simple here. So ignore the 96, that includes the trialist. Instead of what we do now is we go over here, the entire number excluding those who dropped out through failed conversion or refund. So E5 divided by, would you believe, E5. This bit is nice and simple, don't you worry. Render that as a percentage. Lovely. In fact, the only bit of any vague complexity is figuring out where you're going to slap those lovely, lovely dollar signs. The answer, by the way, is just in front of that first E, so now we just simply drag this along way out here, over here, lovely. And that basically tells us that, yeah, when we get all the way out to flipping month 52 and month 54, some people have started dropping out, but for the most part, yeah, of the people that actually started and actually received their first box, pretty much all of them hung around in this first little cohort for bloody flipping ages. Now we can just drag this down a little bit too. Hang on, do we need to drag? Yep, it needs to be dragged down a little bit further yet. So after a little bit of pruning, I've basically removed all of the cohorts that don't exist at this point. Basically, this final number here is the number of people remaining in system at this point when we reach present day for cohorts that have aged enough we can actually know what's going on. And this is where things get good. This is where things get really good. What I'm going to do right now is we're just going to take absolutely all of these cells and we're basically now going to apply conditional formatting. And this is going to let us see which of the cohorts is doing well versus badly. And oh my goodness, life just got sexy, did it not? Right, so what you're seeing right now is for each cohort, i.e. the people who joined in each of these months, that's, oh sorry, I should have actually added in all of the years there as well. So as I was saying, for each of the group of people who joined and started paying in a given month, basically, this is how many of them remained in system over time, with each of these representing a month, and specifically a month where they were shipped a tabby box. Now, at the beginning of time, this is relatively unhelpful because it's small numbers of people. But as we actually get further along and the data gets a bit more complete and there's larger data sets involved, all of a sudden it becomes quite flipping useful, because this is basically a really easy way of telling at a glance which months had really good cohorts in them, i.e. which months had a bunch of people come in who actually stayed in system longer than average. So you might immediately look at, say, September 2014. The people who started to come in September 2014, they were still hanging around, like 95% of them were still in system after flipping 22 boxes. In just the same way, the system can also be used to detect when there might actually be problems. So there was a period in December and January, December 2015 into January 2016, when for some reason a lot more people than we would have expected actually dropped out relatively early. So we might want to look into that and why that happened. Did we give someone a bad experience? Was the first box that was actually shipped to them, this first paid box, which 100% of people who signed up for paid boxes got, was that box inferior? Was Tabby's fluff slightly greasy? Was the toy not chewed enough or too chewed? What was the problem? We might want to look into that box and see if we can maybe fix it in order to avoid it happening again. Now, there's two key uses to this sort of thing. The first one is basically we can start actually looking forward at projecting going on. So, for example, we can actually say, okay, if we know what the first few months look like, can we go on to predict what the following 6 months might look like based on previous data? So if we just took some averages out of here, we might be able to look at the data from, say, early 2017 and say, okay, based on the first 4 months, we can go on to predict that by the time we hit month 24, say, we are likely to have this many people still in system. So you can predict how many people are going to still be in system in future. And if you've got a reasonably high level of consistency, then you can predict it with more accuracy, of course. But the second tier is where things get a bit more interesting, I think. And that's when we start talking about how this all becomes extremely practical for figuring out the financials of this business, which I'm about to make up now, but screw it, if this were a real business, this would be where it got exciting and financially. You see, let's say for argument's sake that we're actually selling these boxes to you. You know, this is a nice business and all of that. Let's say for the sake of argument, we are selling you these boxes at a price of £10 per box. That is what people are actually choosing to pay for this box, or rather what we're charging, what people are happy to actually pay for. Now that's the price per box. The box, however, is also going to have a cost to us. Just simply, literally, you know, paying for the packaging, mailing it to you, etc. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that that's going to be £7 per box. Let's say that. That seems perfectly reasonable. Now, this means the immediate profit per box, before we do anything more complicated, is £3 per box. Nice and simple. So the next calculation we probably want to make for this business now is we want to figure out what the lifetime value per an actual subscriber is going to be. Now, the first thing we need to decide is how long lifetime represents. This is just a choice that every business just has to make for itself. Basically, you can say, okay, if I've got someone on a subscription plan and I know they're very likely to stay on it for a very, very long period of time, like, you know, 80% of them are still going to be there in, you know, nearly 3 years, then it's fine for us to pay quite a lot of money to acquire that person up front in, like, say, a marketing campaign, because we know we're slowly going to get back money off most of them. The thing is, because that money's coming in so slowly, spending a giant whack of money right here, because you're likely to get it back in 3 years' time, might not be good for the cash position of the business. Many businesses, especially smaller businesses, simply couldn't afford to do that. So you have to draw a shorter lifetime value. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that we're going to say our lifetime value is going to be 24 months. 24 months, and then we draw a line, and then basically anything that keeps coming in beyond that is just kind of counted as, like, extra. But we simply say it's just going to be 24 months. So how are we going to calculate what the lifetime value per subscriber is actually going to be? We mean average subscriber, because the subscriber may or may not stay in system. Well, this chart here is going to be bloody useful for that sort of thing, isn't it? Because what we basically want to say is, okay, we know for a fact that, say, our starting position is, in the first month, we are going to get £3 off 100% of subscribers, because everyone that's in this chart is a subscriber. Well, that's fine. That's all 100% fine. So there's £3 up front right there. Let's just quickly put that into pounds, thank you. The following month, however, we're not going to make the same amount of money, because a small number of people are actually going to have dropped out of system. So what instead we're going to say there is, okay, the following month we're going to make £3, but the £3 is going to be multiplied by, hang the flip on here, let's say, just for the sake of ease, this is, you know, you could do this better, because it needs to really be a weighted average, but screw it, we'll just kind of make this nice and simple here. An average of these lovely numbers here. Let's just kind of say these, yeah, this'll do. This'll do absolutely flipping fine. These numbers right here. So an average of this, absolutely fine. So £3 by that average. So, yep, I'm willing to accept that correction. Sorry, I didn't close bracket. So on this occasion, it's now not up to £6, now it's £5.98. And now I'm basically just going to replicate that times, well, literally 24 times, actually. I just realised that was a really stupid way to do it, because I can just do the averages here, then I can actually drag them, and that's way, way faster. So screw that. Sorry, that was stupid. Let's do something better. So instead, let's just actually create some value over time here. That's lovely. And nope, you need to stay still. As usual, just the question of dollars. It's always dollars. So you can see there, as time goes by, as people drop out, the average amount you're getting per what was a subscriber at the beginning is going down, because some of those subscribers that you've already had to pay for are dropping out of system. Now, to actually get the total that we want here, so we know we get the £3 up front, huzzah, and then we just get ourselves a nice sum as well of all of these numbers. Beautiful. So that means the total lifetime per subscriber is £66.40. You see, if we take the number of new subscribers actually coming in during the first half of 2017 here, 45, 39, 25, these aren't huge numbers, but thanks to the projected lifetime value and the extremely high retention, it's extraordinarily high, quite frankly, the extraordinarily high retention of TabbyBox, the projected lifetime value is actually pretty decent. So you know what, though it's going to take months and months and months to actually come in, obviously at the same time you're receiving the old months and months and months revenue from previous TabbyBox subscribers. Unfortunately, we've run into a slight problem here, which is there's a new cost that we kind of didn't really foresee coming, which is Tabby's agents been in touch, basically saying that Tabby needs to be paid for her time and her fluff and her effort, and because she's fabulous and because she has received offers from another cat box company. So we basically need to give her quite a big pay rise. Right now she's paid in biscuits and hugs. Apparently that's not good enough anymore. Tabby has demanded £3,000 per month up front. Now, as you can see, that's not done great things for the business right now, unfortunately. The business is not exactly in a very happy state at all. In fact, we're actually, we are making a loss thanks to the new Tabby cost. So we're going to need to figure something out here. See, Tabby, as it turns out, is a very good negotiator and she's not budging on this figure. So we have to stick with that. So, luckily, I've got a new plan. I've sourced this amazingly cheap source of cardboard. I mean, I'm a bit worried that it's pretty flimsy, but screw it, we'll just have to make it work. We just basically need to figure out how to get the business back to profitability, because the absolute bare minimum viable profit for this company is it needs to make, say, let's say £500 a month profit, so that Claire and I can eat. That would be nice. That'd be absolutely flipping lovely. So we need to get the profit for, say, let's say June. Let's just take June as an example. We need to get that up to 500, and we need to figure out how much we need to shave off the cost of the box to do that. Now, I could just basically start going, what if it was like 6, and okay, what if it was 5? Oh, that's too much. What if it was... No, that's not particularly helpful at all. Luckily, there's one of my favourite tools in Excel to help us do just this. Welcome to What If Analysis. Oh, I'm glad we got to do this. Basically, Goal Seek tool in What If over in the Data tab. I love this thing. So basically, what I need to do is I need to get this figure to be a certain fixed amount. So literally I can say I need that to be 1,000. And I can also say what cell needs to be changed to achieve it. So let's say the cost per box needs to be changed. And I simply just tell GoalSeek to be on its way. And it basically has figured it out. And then if we just open up that, the exact correct amount to get that to £1,000 worth of profit would be £4.98 precisely. Or if I wanted to do something else, I can literally run as many models as I want, because this thing is just beautiful. So let's just say 500. That might be a bit cheap. I'm not sure we can shave that much off the box, to be honest. But if we can get to... 561, that's perfect. The new incredibly cheap and probably slightly dubious cardboard is about 561. The business is saved and Tabby won't be poached by the other box company. Huzzah! And for my final trick today, we're going to create a chart. One of my favourite charts to create. I love doing charts like this. In any sort of company where there's any form of membership system, oh, this is a wonderful, sexy chart to make. Right, let's make this chart, why don't we? So, first thing first, I'm going to need all of this data from up here. So basically I've just created an identical twin to the original shark fin up above, except this time I've stripped out all of the pointless zeros, same as in this one right here. What I'm about to do, by the way, breaks all the rules I just previously said to you, so sorry about that. But we're actually going to do something somewhat manually, and I know that's wrong. It's very wrong. It's so wrong. There is a way to do this, by the way, with a really complicated series of, you know, logic checks and V and H lookups, but honestly, the amount of time it takes is huge. So because I've actually been doing this for quite a few hours at this point, this took quite a while to all put together. You know, oh, no, don't do whatever I just did there. I'm just going to do this one manually, okay? But you know what? Take this as homework, as a challenge. If you can figure out how to automate converting this into this, then well done, because it's quite complex. And I spent, like, before I even started recording this, I spent an hour tinkering with a similar idea to see if I could make it work, and I just flipping couldn't. It was very difficult. You see, all I've really done is taken the data and I've just reformulated it into a slightly more, if you like, realistic way of looking at things. The way it was arranged previously, it took every single month and said, okay, that's a cohort. You just take that forward and you see how it compares to previous cohorts. You were comparing like for likes. You were basically laying each month out so that a month after a month was next to all the other months after a month. But it didn't actually represent how many people were floating around in the business at any one time. Simply by literally taking this and all just shuffling them over, so now the shark fin has gone into reverse. Same data, just basically all of it now just shuffled over to the right. Now we actually have a picture of what the business looks like. Now, admittedly, right now, it doesn't look particularly interesting. But if I just basically highlight all of this and tell Excel to create a stacked bar graph, much like a fireworks display, I have saved the best for last. Because then this becomes this. Say hello to the apex cocking predator of data visualization. A flipping stacked bar graph representing cohorts over time. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Right, just in case you're struggling to see what you're seeing here, what you're seeing here is a stacked bar graph. What it basically represents is when do people come into the system and how long do they stay. So this grey group here is the group of people that became paying subscribers in May of 2013. And that grey group there continues being them through time up to July 2017. So we'll just kind of keep following them through that. So you see it does slowly kind of gently fall away, but for the most part, everything's under control. And then the following month, far fewer people signed up, and some of them stayed in, and it just goes more and more cohorts stacking on top. The number of people in the system going up and up and up as new groups come in, and they stay there, but they also fall away because some of them drop out as well. And it also gives you an idea for whether the whole business at a glance is actually growing or not. So from that we can see actually the business peaked in February of 2017 at just shy of 800 boxes being shipped in that month alone. And then after that, it actually started to decline because some of the old cohort were starting to leave faster than new people were actually arriving into the system. And I just love this chart. I genuinely, I don't know, if you could feel romantic or possibly sexual love for a chart, but I think I'm about as close as a human's ever going to be. It just shows you so much, just at a glance, you know so many things, like the people who have joined your business previously. How are they doing? Are they staying in the business nicely? If there's started to be a problem, where did it kick in? How big is the entire business? You can see how big the entire business is. Is the business currently growing or declining over time? This chart just tells you everything. An alternative render of this chart would, by the way, be, of course, you could just kind of make this into an area. If you kind of made this into a stacked area. I personally find that a bit messier, and I don't like it. I mean, it's basically the same thing. That's kind of like the Jabba the Hutt chart right there. I think I'm happier with it as, yeah, in stacked bar. That's just beautiful. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? I think, having seen what tabby box looks like, and bear in mind, this was just data that people just made up. This is just like a bunch of data that 2,800 people just made up and flung at me. And it was all fake data, and all of them were just kind of putting in things that didn't make sense. And we've turned it into a beautiful, beautiful chart, like a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis of data analysis. And on that, ladies and gentlemen, I think I shall leave you. This has been Excel, and Excel is a thing of beauty, and I love it. And I hope those of you who work with Excel, or might be thinking about working with Excel, or even occasionally might have to use Excel in the future, I hope you might have found something useful here. I think I love it. I just love it. It's so beautiful. It's so flipping beautiful. Just look at all this stuff. It's gorgeous. Oh, it's lovely. No, we're just going to keep focusing on this. Just keep focusing on this because it's too sexy to not focus on. Thank you all so very, very much for making up the 300,000, bloody hell, that Many a True Nerd is now made up of. That is a truly incredible, incredible figure. And hopefully much more to come. Can't believe I just did an Excel video for 300,000. And it was great too, wasn't it? It was just flipping great. So that's that, ladies and gentlemen. That's that. Lord only knows how I'm going to top this the next time we get to a big milestone. I have no bloody clue. But I guess we'll just have to see when it comes around. And in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd. And this has been Excel, my favourite game that's not a game of all time. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Claire, show off what the butter packaging does. That's amazing!
25, 50, 100, and then 110
If you need to buy the butter, you just fold the packaging onto the butter and that's amazing! That's such a good idea!
See,
How long has butter been doing this?
forever.